In this video, I will provide a brief introduction to content analysis. Content analysis is a social scientific research method used for describing, counting, and analyzing visual and textual artifacts. Most commonly, content analysis is considered to be an inductive research method. In other words, the data are collected first, themes emerge, and then out of those themes, tentative empirical generalizations are generated. However, content analysis can also be used for hypothesis testing or deductive research. This method is often thought of as a hybrid of both quantitative and qualitative methods, since it involves both simple descriptive statistics and interpretation of cultural symbols. Typically, content analysis is used to analyze the content and meaning of items with words and/or images, such as magazines, photographs, websites, legal documents, newspapers, and so on. Now, in general, all types of analysis require that one first describe the issue before moving on to interpretation. With content analysis, this is also the case. In terms of the descriptive part, we have two primary types: manifest coding and latent coding. Manifest coding is the process of looking for and then describing the most obvious empirical components of the item being studied. These are the things that are on the surface and can be fairly easily identified, described, and counted. Latent coding is the process of identifying the deeper meanings and symbols behind the words or images being counted. Because latent messages are not obvious, this is also where we start to move from description to interpretation. Regardless of whether you are using content analysis for inductive or deductive purposes, it is important to guide your research with an overarching research question. Once you have a question, then you can choose an archive or cultural artifacts to study. So let's think of a question. Many people these days are interested in issues related to women's representation in the media. And there are many scholars and others arguing that women are becoming more sexualized over time, and that this sexualization translates into a loss of power for women. While many people believe that those statements are true, the research and debates on these topics are ongoing. There are many questions we could ask and many ways we could investigate this topic. For the sake of this video, I'm going to start with the following question. Have representations of women become more sexual over time in U.S. media? And if so, what are the symbolic meanings of this? To do so, I'm going to look at one classic American cultural artifact that is already considered to be sexualized: Playboy magazine. Here we will just look at two magazine covers and not the entire magazine. The Playboy magazine cover will thus be our unit of analysis. The first thing we need to do is to describe the manifest content of these covers. For starters, we might want to take note of the sex or gender identity, the racial identity, body posture, direction of the eyes, etc. of the cover models. For example, on the left we see a slim, white female subject sitting in a chair. She is facing directly toward the camera. The words on the cover include the first name of the model and reference to stories about Steve Jobs, Andy Warhol, cars of the year, and 10 greatest cocktails. On the right, we see a slim woman of color standing, her body facing away from the camera, with her head and her face turning back toward the audience. The words on the cover include her full name, as well as an interview about, quote, weed, the N-word, and Don Imus, who is the infamous sportscaster who was ousted for racist and sexist comments. After looking at these covers, as well as a number of other Playboy magazine covers, such observations would be categorized by the researcher to create a code book to record the frequency and intensity of various images and words. For example, one category or code established would be race, or the apparent race of the cover model. Another category could be body posture. Is she seated, standing, lying down, etc.? And hence at the end, the researcher would be able to report the ratio of women of color to white women on the cover of Playboy magazine over time. They may also be able to see patterns of how body postures may have changed over the course of particular numbers of years and whether or not this correlates with the race of the model. After coding all of the manifest data on the cover, the researcher next looks for slightly deeper meanings or the latent codes of these words and images. For example, to what degree do the headlines on the cover appear to be targeting different racial and class demographics? Why might it be that the cover featuring a blonde woman has a headline about cocktails and the cover featuring a woman of color has a headline about weed? As well, the researcher would want to analyze to what degree is there a shift of messages over time on the cover. What evidence is there that they have become more sexually explicit, less sexually explicit, or remained about the same in terms of their overall messaging over time? Finally, once the manifest and latent codes are established and checked for accuracy by other researchers, the researcher will then need to move into their deeper interpretation of the magazine covers, drawing from a range of theoretical literature. From a social constructivist perspective, which most social scientists subscribe to, at least to some degree, words, images, and artifacts in and of themselves do not have inherent meaning. Instead, meaning can only be understood in relation to the context in which the item is produced and consumed, as well as analyzed. Thus, description of an item is only the beginning of the process. The next part is thinking critically around the potential symbolic meanings of those items, keeping in mind who made them, who modeled for them, who is consuming them, as well as what kinds of popular stories are being told about the meaning of such artifacts. In so doing, it is important to recognize one's own personal reactions to these data, whether this is positive or negative. The point is not to erase one's own opinion, but to stay open to a range of findings, even if they contradict one's opinion. In this case, there may be a variety of theories that could help with the analysis. For example, cultural studies, sexuality studies, media studies, and feminist studies could be useful for the analysis. In sum, in this video, I have briefly described the social scientific research method of content analysis, which typically includes components of counting and describing both manifest themes and latent themes. Together, when done well and combined with thoughtful theoretical analysis, the researcher may be able to deepen their analysis of a variety of cultural artifacts.